Today, we will go over our SQL Server Connection Manager in our SSIS Productivity Pack. The SQL Server Connection Manager is used to establish a connection with a SQL Server instance by using more modern authentication types and is used along with the source and destination components. To create a connection manager in our Integration Services project, we will right-click in the Connection Manager window and select Create New Connection. In the dropdown, we will scroll down to find the SQL Server Connection Manager by KingswaySoft. On the General page of the Connection Manager, it will let you specify the connection properties and authentication. In the first page General tab, you will first specify the domain name or your instance's address. Underneath is the timeout, which lets you specify the maximum number of seconds the Connection Manager will wait when trying to establish a connection. You can specify 0 for an infinite timeout. For connecting to your SQL Server instance, we support multiple different authentication types: SQL Server Authentication, Windows Integrated Authentication, OAuth Authorization Code, OAuth Client Credentials, OAuth Client Credentials Certificate, Azure Active Directory Password, Azure Active Directory Universal with Multi-Factor Authentication, Azure Active Directory Service Principal, Azure Active Directory Managed Identity, and Azure Active Directory Default. For SQL Server authentication, you will be entering in your user ID and password for SQL Server. For Windows Integrated Authentication, you will not need to enter in any credentials, as the Connection Manager automatically authenticates as the currently signed in user. For the OAuth Authorization Code authentication type, you will be using a token file to connect. If you already have a token file, you can click on the ellipsis to find the token file and then enter in the token file password. If you do not have a token, you can generate a new token by clicking Generate Token File. You can then enter your tenant ID, client secret, and redirect URL, which will be obtained from your app in Microsoft Entra. After you click Sign In and Authorize, you will be asked to log in. After logging in, you will be redirected to your redirect URL, which should contain your redirect code. You can then save your newly generated token file. For obtaining the client credentials, we will need to log into Azure Portal. Then we go inside Microsoft Entra ID to get our tenant ID. You can then create a new app by going to App Registration, New Registration. You can then enter in the app name and redirect URL. Lastly, go into Certificates and Secrets to configure your client secret or certificate. For Client Credentials Certificate, you only need to enter your tenant ID and client ID. You will then need to specify the location of the certificate thumbprint you are using, either store or file system. If you choose the store option for certificate location, the ellipsis will open the certificate chooser, which lets you see both the local machine and current user certificate store. If you choose File System option for certificate location, the ellipsis will open up a file explorer to find the path to the certificate file you wish to use for authentication. The component also supports Azure Blob Shared Access Signature URL in the certificate path. For this authentication method to work, you will need to have uploaded the certificate into your app. For Azure Active Directory Password, you will be entering in your user ID and password for Azure. For Universal with MFA, no credentials are required as it will authenticate with the current signed-in user. For Service Principal, you will need user ID and password. For Managed Identity, you will only need the user ID. For Default, you will also only need the user ID. Finally, after setting up the authentication, you can click Test Connection to make sure you are properly connected. Then you can select the database you are trying to write to by selecting it from the drop-down. On the second page is the HTTP proxy. If you have a proxy on your server, you may include these here, either by auto-detecting a system-configured one, or manually entering the proxy by entering the server, port, and possibly username and password. Please note that the HTTP proxy page is only available for OAuth authentication type. Lastly, we have the Advanced page, which will allow you to specify some advanced settings for the Connection Manager. Once you have the Connection Manager configured, to read data from your SQL Server instance, you can drag and drop the Premium SQL Server source component in the SSIS toolbox. into the data flow. When we open the source component, it will take us to the general page. The source component requires a SQL Server Connection Manager to connect to the instance. So first, we will select the SQL Server Connection Manager we have just created. Next, we will select the data source, which displays a drop-down of available tables and views from the database that was selected in the Connection Manager. Once you select a table, a SQL command will automatically be generated. Underneath the data source is the command timeout option, which lets you specify the maximum number of seconds the component will wait for the command before a timeout. The next option is to specify the type of transaction type by either selecting explicit or implicit. The transaction isolation option is only available when the transaction type is explicit. This option allows you to specify concurrency behavior for database tables. Next is the parameterized command option, which is used to protect against SQL injection. We recommend to only disable this option when necessary. The command text box is the command that will be executed to SQL Server to read the data from the database. The command text box also allows the use of variables by clicking the Insert Variable dropdown. This will allow you to parameterize the command. We also support loading SQL from a file into the command property by clicking on the Import button. We also support saving the SQL from the command property to a file with the Export button. Lastly, the preview will show a preview of the first 200 rows of the command. If any command makes any changes to the database, the changes will appear in the preview but are rolled back immediately. Finally, we have the refresh component button, which will get the component to retrieve the latest metadata from SQL Server and update each field. The expression FX button launches the SSIS expression editor, so you can dynamically set properties for the component. The generate documentation icon will generate a Word document that describes the component's metadata, including relevant mapping and other information. Once we have all the settings configured on the general page, we can go to the columns page. The columns page will populate with the SQL Server fields you have selected in the command. In the columns page, the first column allows you to control which fields are sent for the downstream path. You can do this by selecting or unselecting specific fields. The topmost checkbox will either select or deselect all fields. The second column that we see is the name of the field. The third column is the data type that is associated with the SQL Server field. The final page for the source component is the pre and post commands. This page allows you to specify commands to execute before and after the component execution. The pre command is executed in the pre-execute phase. The success post command is executed in the post-execute phase, and the error post command will be executed in the post-execute phase when an error occurs. If you do not wish to execute any commands, you can leave them blank. The pre and post command text box also allows the use of variables by clicking the Insert Variables dropdown, similar to the command text box. The Premium SQL Server destination is used for writing to SQL Server. When working with the SQL Server destination component, we will begin with sample data that we can use to write to our SQL Server environment. We can then drag and drop our SQL Server destination into the data flow and connect our source to the destination. When we open the SQL Server destination component, it will take us to the general page. Similar to the source component, the SQL Server destination component requires a SQL Server Connection Manager to connect to the instance. So first, we will select the SQL Server Connection Manager that we have created. The next option is the action dropdown, which is the command you want to execute on the destination table. The available actions are insert, which lets you add records to the destination table, update, which lets you update existing records in the destination table, upsert, where if the specified record exists in the destination table, it is updated, otherwise it will be inserted, delete, which lets you delete existing records from the destination table, full sync, which will synchronize your input data to the destination table. The full sync action differs from the upsert action because it can delete those records in the target system but are not in the source system. Lastly, custom command, which will allow you to write your own database command. When custom command action is selected, you can enter in your command in the command text box. You can also drag and drop items in the tree view to the command text box to help you construct the command. After selecting action, we will select the destination table. The dropdown will display a list of available tables from the database. You can also use the Create Table option. The Create Table option will launch a SQL Server Table Creator, which will let you create a table based on the input columns from your upstream component. You can further customize the command by adding or removing columns. The Update Table button will launch a SQL Server Table Updater, which lets you update or alter a table based on the input columns from your upstream component. There are different types of alter commands you can perform with the table updater. You can choose which one you wish to perform by selecting the checkbox. We have add missing columns and drop additional columns. Next, we will look at the command timeout option, which lets you specify the maximum number of seconds the component will wait for the command before a timeout. The next option, transaction type, is used to specify the type of transaction by either selecting implicit or explicit. The option transaction isolation level is only available when the transaction type is explicit. This option allows you to specify the concurrency behaviors for database tables. There are 6 options: chaos, read committed, read uncommitted, repeatable read, serializable, snapshot. Next is the write mode, which specifies how the data is written to the database. We have 2 options available, row by row and bulk. The next option, batch size, is available if you have bulk write mode. This option will specify the batch size. You can set it to 0 to use the SIS buffer size. If you are working with update or upsert action, our bulk write mode also supports duplicate handling. Lastly, we will go over the buttons on the bottom of the component. The refresh component will allow the component to retrieve the latest metadata from the database and update each field. The map unmapped fields button will map any unmapped field by matching their names with the input columns from upstream components. The clear all mappings button will reset all your mappings. The expression FX button will launch the SIS expressions editor to enable you to dynamically set properties. The Generate Documentation button will generate a Word document that describes the component's metadata, including relevant mappings and other information. The SQL Server Destination Columns page is where you will be mapping the input columns to the destination fields. The columns page has 5 columns. From left to right, we have input column, destination table column, text lookup, data type, and unmap. The input column lets you select which column from the upstream component to write to the corresponding field. The destination table column is the field that the input column will be writing to. The lookup column is a lookup feature. When this option is selected, the component can perform a lookup based on the input values. The data type column shows the field's data type. Lastly, the unmap column is used to unmap the input column from the destination field. However, if there's no column mapped to the destination field, it can be used to map the upstream input column to the destination field by matching the name. If you are performing an update or upsert action, there will be an additional key field column. This will let you choose one or a combination of key fields to be used when updating. The SQL Server lookup can be used by clicking on the ellipsis for the lookup column. This will open up the lookup editor. Here you can select the lookup table and the column you want to be returned. You can also configure the conditions for the lookup. You can add in multiple conditions and can use an AND or an OR condition. The next page of the component is the pre and post commands page. This page allows you to specify commands to execute before and after the component execution. The pre command is executed in the pre-execute phase. The success post command is executed in the post-execute phase, and the error post command will be executed in the post-execute phase when an error occurs. If you do not wish to execute any commands, you can leave them blank. Pre and post command text box also allows the use of variables by clicking the Insert Variables dropdown, similar to the command box. Lastly, we have the error handling page, which is used to specify how errors should be handled if they occur. Our component has 3 options for handling errors: fail on error, redirect rows to error output, ignore error. If fail on error is selected, the component will fail on the first error that occurs. If redirect rows to error output is selected, the component will not fail if any error occurs. Instead, any records that fail will be passed to the error output, while any successful records will still be passed down to the default output. The error output will then show the error message output column, which may contain the error message that was reported when the record failed. The error output can be written to any database or any destination component for additional logging. The last option is ignore error, which will fully ignore any errors that occur. Please note that the error will still occur, however, the component will not fail and you will not receive any error messages. Lastly, on the error handling page, we have the option to enable any additional output columns from the destination component. You can select the columns that you want to be outputted. Finally, we will go over the Premium SQL Server command task. The Premium SQL Server command task is a control flow component, which is different from the other components we have discussed in the video. The Premium SQL Server command task is used to run commands to a database instance directly. We will first drag and drop the command task into our control flow. When we open the command task component, it will take us to the general page. Similar to the source and destination component, to use the command task, you will need a SQL Server Connection Manager. We will select the SQL Server Connection Manager from before. The next option is the command timeout, which lets you specify the maximum number of seconds the component will wait for the command before a timeout. Next is the transaction type, which lets you specify the type of transaction by either selecting explicit or implicit. The next option, transaction isolation level, is only available when the transaction type is set as explicit. The transaction isolation levels define the degree to which the operations in one transaction are isolated from the operations of other concurrent transactions. This option allows you to specify concurrency behaviors for database tables. There are 6 options: chaos, read committed, read uncommitted, repeatable read, serializable, snapshot. Next is the parameterized command option, which is used to protect against SQL injection. We recommend to only disable this option when necessary or when you have inserted a variable. The command text box is the command that will be executed to the SQL Server instance. You can type in your command into the command text box, or you can also drag and drop the items from the tree view to the command text box to help construct the command. We also support loading a command from a file with the import button. You can also save the command to a file with the export button. Lastly, preview will show a preview of the first 200 rows of the command. If any command makes any changes to the database, the changes will appear in the preview but are rolled back immediately. The expression FX button launches the SSIS expression editor so that you can dynamically set properties for the component. The second page for the SQL Server command task is the output page, which shows you the available output settings. The command task has 4 output types: none, single row, scalar, and result set. When selecting single row, you will first need to choose the right single row selection mode. Options are first, last, specify row index. Next, you will set the output. The column index is the index for the column you want to be read, and the output variable is the variable where the column will be written to. The parameter output section handles any output parameters. You can set the variable you want the output parameter to be written. The next option is scalar, which will allow you to choose the output variable for the scalar output. The scalar option also supports working with output parameters. Lastly, the result set option will allow you to choose the variable to store result set outputs. Usually this will be an object variable. The result set option also supports working with output parameters. On the last page of the SQL Server command task is the error handling. The error handling page is used to specify how errors should be handled if they occur. Our component has 3 options for handling errors: fail on error, write error to variable, ignore error. If fail on error is selected, the component will fail on the first error that occurs. If write error to variable is selected, the component will not fail if any error occurs. Instead, the component will pass the error to a variable. You can choose the variable you want the component to write to. You can also create a new variable to write the error to. The last option is ignore error, which will fully ignore any errors that occur. Please note that the error will still occur, however the component will not fail and you will not receive any error messages. Thanks for watching our video on our Premium SQL Server components from our SSIS Productivity Pack. KingswaySoft. Integration made easy.